Please remain seated. The show will begin in 3, 2...
Like a Hellcat.
Hello, ghoul friends. Those who are freaky chic, fans of the supernatural, and all things spooky. I'm your host, FandomTraveller87, and welcome back to my channel, my very own dark, creepy corner of paradise, where I dive deep into the exploration of the unknown, the unusual, the morbid. And I must implore you, for those who are listening, for those who are skeptics, please, if you can, for just a moment, suspend your disbelief. There may be such a thing as the other world that is hidden behind the veil of our subconscious minds. For those that are unseen, they want to have a voice. They want to make a connection with us from the other side. And I'm sure there are many of you who have experienced seeing and hearing things that others have not. And we must all be wary of our surroundings. We have to be aware of the dangers. And there will be a time where we must take a risk in order to find the answers that we seek. Now, I want to thank you so much for listening. And if you haven't already, please like and subscribe and hit the bell to get all notifications for future uploads. A lot of time, energy, and effort and love goes into making these projects, and me uploading wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for your support. And as always, it is most appreciated. After all, who doesn't like getting scared every now and then? Now, before I continue on with this video, if any of you have a listener submission story that you would love for me to narrate on my channel in the future, perhaps something like a creepypasta of your own, or an original scary ghost story that you would love to have submitted and to have read, please go directly to my business email at hopegivesyouvings.com@gmail.com. Thank you, and let's travel back, climb right back into the burial vault for part 3 of this story, written and narrated by yours truly. I'm FandomTraveller87, and I hope that you enjoy. And at any moment, if it becomes a little too scary for you, please feel free to exit the video at any time. Let's just hope you don't lose a limb over this. Let's hope that you don't lose your head. I give you the Headless Bellhop, Part 3. A few weeks had passed, and on a cool, crisp, sunny afternoon, out in the backyard, Miguel had been playing hide-and-seek with his new friends, Pedro and Don Juan. Pedro and Don Juan stayed a couple floors above Miguel's family, and they had lived at the hotel since birth. They were much older than Miguel, both 13 years old, and these two tended to assert themselves as being hotshots that got away with just about anything. They were known to cause all sorts of mischief, and they liked telling a few ghost stories to scare the younger kids. Pedro was considered to be bossy and overly cocky, who had a know-it-all attitude, and Don Juan wasn't the brightest bulb in the bunch, more like a lackey that looked up to Pedro and gave him way too much credit. The older boys always peer-pressured Miguel into stealing sweets from the hotel kitchen and throwing water balloons at people's pets when they walked by on leashes. During their game, Pedro was the last one to be the seeker, and once the game had finished, he had an idea that they would later regret. "How about we sneak out of our rooms," he said, "and wait for the headless bellhop to appear?" Miguel was feeling uneasy and chimed in. Maybe we shouldn't," he replied. "My abuela told me that we need to follow the rules. We have to be in bed by 9 and—" He was cut off by Pedro immediately, who approached him, hovering over him with an intimidating glare. "Don't be a killjoy, amigo," Pedro snapped. "And you seriously don't believe that dumb story about the ghost of the bellhop wandering your floor at night and leaving dead mice in people's shoes, do you? Adults just say all that stuff so kids can't explore neat places by themselves. And aren't you the least bit curious to find a missing head?" Miguel gulped, nervously shaking his head. "I just think it's a bad idea," he exclaimed. "And besides, I'm sure there is a security guard that monitors all the floors. We can get caught." "Don't be a baby," retorted Don Juan. "We just want some cake from the kitchen fridge. And it's not like anyone will find out it was us." "I don't know," said Miguel. "And I promised my abuela." Don Juan and Pedro rolled their eyes, seemingly annoyed and frustrated. "You're becoming a drag," Pedro replied firmly. "And besides, you owe us, amigo." Miguel arched an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" he argued boldly. Don Juan gripped the neck collar of Miguel's red sweatshirt, pinning him up against the right wall. "We did you a favor, remember?" he scolded. "Remember the butcher shop? We would have gotten caught taking those steaks from the front counter due to your clumsiness. We could have just ditched you and left with the steaks." "Forget him, he's too chicken," said Pedro, turning away and crossing his arms in agitation. "And he's really slow, too. Let's go by ourselves. We don't need him." "I'm not chicken," shouted Miguel. The older boys laughed. "Then prove it," said Pedro. "Let this be a test of courage. If you're really our friend, you will do this for us. 10 o'clock tonight, sneak out of your hotel room and go to the elevator on your floor. It's had maintenance work done on it, so you shouldn't have any problems. The kitchen is in the lobby area on the first floor, near the front desk." "And what happens if I run into the ghost?" asked Miguel. He was very afraid now. Don Juan sighed, letting go of him and looking over to Pedro. "Then take the stairs if you see someone," said Pedro. "Meet us outside by the treehouse when you got the cake." After further protesting, Miguel finally agreed, and his family would be going out to dinner and visiting relatives, so he'd be by himself in the hotel room. At 8 p.m., Miguel was nestled into bed, the covers pulled over his face with his eyes peeking out, as his abuela reminded him sternly to stay inside and keep all the lights off. She also asked him if he cleaned his shoes before coming back inside, and he said yes. Later that night, come 10 o'clock, Miguel put on his red sweatshirt and his sneakers, tiptoeing over to the door and pressing his ear against it to listen for any sounds. Nothing. He slowly lifted the latch and opened the door halfway, peeking his head out. Nobody. Miguel sighed with relief. No headless bellhop. He closed the door behind him and went down the corridor over towards the elevator on the other side. With a quivering hand, he pulled out a flashlight. He had nothing to worry about. Ghosts aren't real. But he realized he had broken his promise to his abuela, and he would pay the price for it. Walking down the vast corridor towards the ominous elevator, Miguel's flashlight had guided the way as the young boy's eyes darted around. There was a heavy coldness in the air, a darkness so thick it seemed to cast out any sense of warmth and hope. Miguel could sense the dread. He knew that during the day the hotel was booming with laughter and full of smiles. There was so much more beneath the surface of the many wonders of the hotel's charm and rich history. Secrets buried, tucked away within its walls and behind doors. As the other guests slept peacefully in their beds, only the sound of Miguel's footsteps could be heard, yet very faintly. He treaded lightly, moving slowly as he possibly could, keeping a low profile. As soon as he reached the elevator, Miguel pressed the call button, and once the sliding doors opened, he entered reluctantly. For a brief moment his flashlight flickered as he stood facing the hallway, and the split second that the elevator doors closed, Miguel caught a glimpse of a shadow of something. He then pressed the first floor button, but then as the elevator had descended, it had only gone halfway down, and then it stopped. Miguel stood stock still, frozen in place, his flashlight once again flickering, before the battery had quickly drained, and it was then completely pitch black inside of the elevator. There was this icy cold chill, and the young boy was trembling, sweating profusely, his heart sinking into his chest. He heard this god-awful sound that could make a blind man sob. It carried all around the outside of the elevator. The walls shook upon the weight of the shrill shrieking of various cries of torment, and suddenly there came a bang, 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 like there were several tiny fists violently knocking on the outer walls. It was followed by scratching and sobbing, disembodied voices of children that faded in and out as the breeze picked up. Miguel then could smell the rottenness. It was like when you go hunting and see a deer carcass for the first time. But the odor was beyond anything that ever protruded the boy's nostrils. The air reeked of decay. And then he heard the ding sound of the elevator, eyeing the lit-up 5th floor button. The past 15 minutes, the elevator shot up, but randomly plummeted to different floor numbers, and just like that, like a yo-yo, it just bounced back to the 3rd floor, then the 5th floor, then to the 2nd floor. Miguel was holding on to the bronze handlebar within the elevator for dear life. He was trying to keep his balance. Then, as the elevator finally reached the 1st floor and jerked to a halt, as Miguel backed himself against the far left corner wall, there was an ember, a bright yellow light that swung fluidly in the dark. Then it stopped, and a figure stood by the elevator doors. It was tall, 6'5", muscular built, a male wearing a navy blue, neatly pressed and clean jacket with yellow buttons on the front. The figure was dressed prim and proper. Along with the top it wore black pants and old-school well-tied matching shoes. In its left white velvet gloved hand, it held an iron lantern. And the person had no head. Miguel couldn't speak. He couldn't utter a sound. This was the ghost of the Headless Bellhop. The specter was searching for his missing head, and as soon as the elevator doors opened to the 1st floor, the lobby, Miguel sprinted, making a mad dash, as the ghost swung his other arm, holding a long blade in his right hand. The boy was petrified, and he made his way over to the kitchen doors. He had turned around and saw the Headless Bellhop floating in his direction. Through the glowing, flaming ember of the lantern, a face with that of winter snow, and narrowed eyes of black coal fixated on the boy, it had glared with murderous intent at Miguel. Miguel bolted into the kitchen and hid in the far left kitchen cupboard as he climbed to the counter, covering his mouth and trying to steady his breathing. He did not want to move. He did not want to make any noise. Then he heard the kitchen door swing open and slam against the walls. nearly falling off the hinges. All the other doors opened and slammed shut in unison, and Miguel shut his eyes tightly. Then came that atrocious stench of decay and death, and it made the boy nauseous. The light of the lantern came closer and closer to where the boy hid. He held on to the door handle desperately as the door to the cupboard shook, as though something or someone was trying to rip it open. It went on for 20 minutes. That was for how long the boy stayed there, till the light of the lantern grew dimmer and dimmer, fading away along with the smell that emitted from the headless bellhop. Once the coast was clear, he left the cupboard and contemplated whether or not he ought to steal the chocolate cake from the fridge. He was afraid of what his friends might do to him if he returned to them empty-handed. Miguel was more afraid of being a target of a vengeful ghost than getting beaten to a pulp by Pedro and Don Juan, who he believed were far worse, that deserved punishment so severe at the hands of the ghost that not only haunted the third floor, but the entire building. Miguel, of course, was on a mission, and he had to follow through with it, even if he didn't like it. He opened the fridge and took the single-layered chocolate cake that was encased with a glass lid on a silver platter. Miguel realized something. He had dropped his flashlight somewhere. He then remembered the door with the stairs that led to the backyard. He decided it was the quickest way to get to his friends, and so he wasted no time and hurried down the steps to the exit door. Miguel met Pedro and Don Juan outside of their treehouse, handing them the chocolate cake. They asked him what took him so long, and then he explained what happened. The older boys laughed and told him he made it all up, and sent him on his way. It didn't upset Miguel that they didn't believe him more than he was angry about how he went through a terrifying ordeal and wasn't getting any chocolate cake. So he returned to the hotel room and was sure to leave his shoes outside the door, forgetting to wipe his feet before coming back inside. He locked the door behind him and had gone back to bed, dozing off to sleep. By 11 o'clock, he was startled by a noise outside the hotel room. It was heavy knocking. He figured it must have been his abuela and his other family members returning sooner than he expected. But it wasn't. Miguel stopped just a couple inches from the door. That's when he was hit with that same all too familiar putrid stench. And his blood ran cold when he saw that yellow light shining through the bottom crack in the door. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't. All he could do was pray that he could make it to morning, just one more hour, and his family would be home, and he would be safe, and it will all be over.